Can we start? Are we live? We are live on YouTube. Okay, all right. We are live on YouTube. Not in 3, 2, 1. We are already live, apparently. So, hello everyone. Hi everyone. Welcome to the first United Nations Resident Coordinators Dialogue with the UN Association in Indonesia in celebration of UN and also the UN Association in Indonesia Day. In the beginning, I was actually conceptualizing to have a more interesting name, but because it was such in a rush, I was like, you know what? Let's just say the name of the event is UNRC Dialogue with ahead of the G20. And thanks to the support of Mahagiri Villa Sanur for hosting us for today's event. Here in Mahagiri Villa Sanur, they strongly uphold the Balinese traditional philosophy of, let me read it, Tri Hita Karana, or basically, which literally means the three causes of well-being. So that is the Balinese people traditional philosophy that are strongly upheld by the Mahagiri Villa Sanur. The three causes of well-being are harmony with God, and then harmony among people, and the last one is harmony with nature or the environment. And the later twos are actually manifested by Mahagiris in Mahagiri's local pride. So for among people, Mahagiri is collaborating with local suppliers as well as maximizing employment from the local community. And for the environment, for the third part of the Tri Hita Karana, right? With the environment, Mahagiri is also implementing responsible energy consumption by minimizing electricity and water usage. So I'm inviting you all who are watching, whether here, people from the backstage and also online, I'm inviting you all to enjoy our time here in Mahagiri Villa Sanur here in Bali. My name is Giras, and I'm the president of the United Nations Association Indonesia. And I'm here today accompanied by my friends and colleagues from the senior management team of the Secretariat, as well as my friend and dear colleague, Madame Valerie Juliong, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinator. So before we begin, I would just go around the clock to introduce ourselves, who you are, and what you do, simply like that. So let's start with Rani, perhaps.
Okay, thank you so much, Giras. And hi, everyone on YouTube watching from wherever you are. My name is Andiana Maharani, or you can call me Rani. I'm the Undersecretary General for Communication and Outreach Department in UNA Indonesia, and I'm very glad to have you here. I'll move on to Muthia, maybe?
Sure. Hi everyone. Good evening or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Mutia, or you can call me Mutia or Tia. Currently the Undersecretary General for Program Development here at United Nations Association Indonesia, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion today.
All right, then it's my turn. My name is Farah Ariftia, and I am the Undersecretary General for Internal Affairs here at UNAI. And I'm actually really looking forward to this discussion, as well as enjoying the evening or afternoon with all of you and with my friends here, of course.
Yep. Thank you, everyone on YouTube or in live. My name is Aga. I'm the Secretary General of UNA Indonesia. Happy to have everyone here. Happy to have this discussion with Madam Valerie, and happy to have this event finally.
Good afternoon and good day to all of you on YouTube, and I'm very happy to be here with the President, the Secretary General, and the Undersecretary Generals of the United Nations Association in Indonesia. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you. I really look forward to that discussion. It's really nice to be in the island of Bali, all together here actually for the G20. But to have this discussion before the G20, it's actually very refreshing. So thank you very much for organizing it.
Thank you very much, Madame Valerie. So, Madame Valerie, because I already briefed my team, of course, but I would just like to tell you, sorry, my frangipani is falling off. I love it. That's the only thing I love. The one thing I love the most about Bali is its beautiful nature. So today, we are here to just have a fun chit-chat. Literally, just a fun chit-chat about us, about you, about the UN and about the UN Association in Indonesia. First thing first, today Chit Chat is in celebration of the UN Day as well as United Nations Association Indonesia first anniversary. I know before you told me that you were shocked that it has only been a year of anniversary of UNAI because it feels like you've been working with us for so long. So for the past year, UNAI has been launched and has worked together with the UN. And personally speaking, it has been so much fun for me. It was a wild ride of fun. And I really do appreciate the UN cooperation with us. And I think our partnership has been very much mutually beneficial in advancing the youth agenda. So I would like to give the mic to you. Do you have any remarks you want to say for UNAI first anniversary, as well as reflecting back on our past 1 year of partnership? Like, what do you want to reflect on?
Thank you, Jiras and the team. First, let me say to all of you, happy anniversary. I think that's, and I hope you will share a big cake tonight to celebrate. First of all, I have to you know that actually when this association was established, therefore a year ago, it was the first youth-based United Nations association. Have been working all over the world in all the different continents, have been dealing with a number of UN associations, but this one is the first one being youth-based. And I think you were actually ahead of your time somewhat, because in that sense that with the discussion we're going to have today, discussing our common agenda, discussing the reality that is discussed in the COP today, also in the COP 27, thinking that the decision we take today have an impact on future generation. So the importance of youth. So I would say having a youth-based UN association makes sense, because it's a good way to actually promote the very idea that we need to involve the youth at all levels in the discussions and in the decisions. So when I reflect about our collaboration over this only last year, because I really thought it was longer than that, I must say I want to congratulate all of you, because I think it has been a very active year. And once again, I have elements of comparison, trust me, with what other UN associations are doing in the world. And this UN association in Indonesia is super active. Really, you've been doing a lot. And really I want to congratulate you, because you not only wanted to create a UN association, but you were genuine in your desire to make something out of it, to make it work. And that is important. And for instance, these regular dialogues that have been organized, co-organized between my office and the UN association are actually such a good opportunity to debate a number of ideas and to do exactly once again what in the UN we have been promoting, especially through our common agenda. So somewhat I would say you are a little common agenda here through the way you're working. And in that sense, it's really amazing. And my team that is dealing with you on a regular basis, organizing these events, has been always very complimentary about the fact that you are enthusiastic, you are dedicated, you are committed. So I really want to congratulate you for that. And as I say, I think it has been a very fruitful first year. Now what is important is to keep it, to keep going. We can't do something nice the first year and let it down. And I think at one stage, maybe in 10 years from today, you will have to change, because you won't be that young at that moment. So maybe you will have to change the whole team to continue to have that very spirit of a youth-based organization.
Thank you very much, Madam Valerie. I know it has been we heard from a lot of UN colleagues that it has been a very, very active year. Yeah, quoting verbatim from your head of Resident Coordinator Office, Ms. Afka Boatsman, she said, we've done a lot this year, which is surprising. And in comparison to other UN associations, she also mentioned that. So that's on UNAI anniversary. And you already touched upon what we are going to discuss today. It's going to be about our common agenda. So we've already talked about the youth agenda. I think it was two years ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, that there is also this new thing called the Our Common Agenda. Like, what is this? What is this Our Common Agenda? So, correct me if I'm wrong. The Our Common Agenda is a set of recommendation by the UN Secretary General, aimed to advance the common agenda of the international community and to respond to current and future challenges. So that's the whole idea of the Our Common Agenda for the audience watching from YouTube. That's going to be our topic. And what is interesting about Our Common Agenda is there is one whole chapter, a whole chapter. Probably there's like 7 chapter or so, and there's like a whole one chapter dedicated to just talk about the younger generation and the future generation. It really shows, it really highlights the importance of youth involvement within the UN in promoting UN values and UN goals and promoting the UN Charter. Hence today's theme, Succeeding Generation, Shaping the Future. That's the title of the chapter in Our Common Agenda. And there's certainly a lot to talk about. So basically, that chapter, the Succeeding Generation, Shaping the Future chapter, discussed 2 main ideas. The first one is solidarity with the younger generation. And then the second one discuss solidarity with future generation. There are a lot to talk about. So the 5 of us will ask Madame Julien as the resident coordinator some question on the topic that highlights the different aspects of that chapter, the Succeeding Generation Shaping the Future. So I will, without further ado, let's start with me. Okay, I will ask this question. When talking about solidarity with younger generation, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Where do we start? Where do we start having solidarity with younger generation? And of course, the answer is education. You know, and unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the state of education is currently in crisis. The pandemic has had a very long-lasting impact on our state of education, and even I can personally say, as an elementary school teacher myself, that I am heavily impacted by this. Absolutely. Now, in response to that, last September, the UN held this summit called the Transforming Education Summit. And the intention of the summit, as far as I know, is to accelerate the progress towards SDG 4, quality education. What I want to ask to Madame Julien, to Ibu Valerie, is, can you please, before answering my question, can you please briefly walk us through what the Transforming Education Summit is to the audience who probably just heard it now, what the Transforming Education Summit is? And I want to ask you, what is the significance of this summit in accelerating the progress of SDG 4 in Indonesia? So that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, how can we ensure that during this whole transforming education, children and youth are also engaged? So they are not only the beneficiaries of this whole Our Common Agenda, Transforming Education Summit agenda, but also they are involved in transforming the education itself. Yeah, that will be my question.
How long do we have? 4 hours? Because this is a topic in itself that would definitely need a very long discussion. But maybe what your first question was on what it is really and why addressing the issue of transformation. But I think it's very simple. If you look at the world today and the way our world goes, which is not really great, okay? Because we are now discussing, as I say, in Egypt at the COP27, the future of the planet. But it's not like there is the planet and there is us. We are on the planet, you know. But we are discussing the fact that we have managed, humanity has managed in 50 years to destroy 70% of the biodiversity on the planet. So there you think, in 50 years, how was those people educated? The human beings who have done that, who have taken those decisions, how have they been educated? So I think somewhat this issue is education should do more than only teach you how to write and read or calculate. Education is also a set of value, principles, vision. And somewhat, when we look at the world and we see how the world has been going, this is a component that is lacking. Let alone the fact that still today in the world, so many children are not going to school. And those who are going to school are not necessarily going to good schools. So when we talk about transforming education, it's actually both at the level of what is being taught at school. So we have to rethink the subject, because you see, the way the schools are organized in our world, and this is what the summit discussed, is that in 2022, we continue to have a system that was in place just after the Second World War. But 75 plus years have elapsed, and we haven't changed that. However, the world has changed. So the schooling, the way we organize school in our today's world, with some exceptions, some countries are more ahead than others, but in general, it's outdated. It's also not efficient because so many children go through school and still don't know how to write and read. But the worst part is that maybe children don't know how to think, because the same, we haven't necessarily educated children so that they become thinker. Because there was as well, going back after the Second World War, this idea that, and even before the Second World War, but as a matter of fact, that children, they don't have a say. Adults decide. And that's very wrong. It's like if today we say, youth have no say. Only the older generation knows. You know, there is this proverb that old people know. That old people know. So meaning you guys know nothing. You know, but based on that, we have it all wrong. We had it all wrong in terms of system, in terms of curriculum, in terms of approach on the children. So what the summit discussed actually was very much to transform the school of today and tomorrow into, let's say, a learning process that considers children in a different manner. They're active members, and they have a say, and they also can bring. We need to teach them more than reading and writing, and we need to insist on the values. And these are the values that are also within the common agenda. You know, the fact that we have public common goods, that the planet is not here for us, but we are here with it. That we need to all live together, but nobody is at the service of the other. And with the humanity, we got it completely wrong. You know, thinking that animals are there for us. The planet is there for us. So therefore, I can eat them all, destroy them all, do whatever I want, forgetting that it's the very balance between all that that makes our life possible, including for us. So we are only one element, you know, in the universe, and one element on this planet. And this is all that, and I think this has come from a system of education that has not valued those type of thinking. So somewhat the Transforming Education Summit was looking in a modern manner, you know, with today's lens, you know, and say, how can we, what has failed in our education? And as I say, you appreciate whether your system was good on the basis of the results you have. And the result education was that we had so many people in the world that got it completely wrong, because the end result is a planet that is in serious danger because we got it completely wrong. So that's what it is all about. Now, your second question was how we can ensure the participation of youth, their engagement. Well, I think I answered partly to that, in the sense that there isn't one entity that teaches and the other one who are just receiving, saying nothing. You know, it's the same approach there was for women. For how many millenniums we have been considering that women first are less intelligent than men, and only one man could have imagined that theory. And even when all the studies were pointing at the fact that it's not true, you still had a number of people who were not showing the studies. But also that women could not participate. And what we say today is that if women do not participate at all levels in everything, the world is not going to develop. And the example is that the countries actually today that are the most developed from a human and human rights and well-being and tolerance and solidarity perspective are those countries where there is an equality between men and women, where children are considered where in their own rights and have also a say in the educational system. And these are the Scandinavian countries. So that's what it is all about. So education is not this kind of systematic things that we do since, the beginning of the 19th century. No. The world has changed, education has to change, and we have to learn the lessons from the past. So that was the whole reasoning behind that.
Thank you very much, Madam Farah. Do you have any question to ask for me regarding education then?
Well, actually, you mentioned that you are a teacher. And that's quite interesting, because it would be interesting to get also your perspective, because you're asking me how we can make sure that the youth and the children are engaged. So you, in your experience as a teacher, how do you think we can get those youth, those children engaged? And especially in the context of Indonesia, if you look at it, because that's your experience. So how do you see that?
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Valerie. Well, what's interesting is education is the closest social issue and the most well-known one by children and youth. Why? Because it directly affects them and impacts them. And in Indonesia, I know we've seen there already exist student councils in middle and high schools in Indonesia. So I think we really need to empower those student council to have a more policy-making, decision-making capability, for instance. But that's more on the policy-making realm. But in my experience as an elementary school teacher, where student council doesn't exist, I think that by listening to my students, as well as asking for constructive feedback on how would they want me to teach, how the kids want me to teach, So having an interaction, having a student-centered way of teaching, exactly. So that's what I want to highlight. Having a student-centered way of teaching by listening to my student and asking for constructive feedback on how they want me to teach, so I can teach better. So as simple as that. Yeah. So that's a wrap on the topic of education. I'll move on to the next question. Aga.
Okay, so Madam Valerie, countries around the world has been transitioning slowly towards a more greener economy. And this transition towards the greener economy also means that there's transition towards greener jobs. Jobs that are previously, let's say, less or non-green are slowly being transitioned to greener jobs, or even whole sectors, whole career that are previously, let's say, more environmentally destructive are being de-invested. People are investing more on greener industry. And so this means that there's a lot more greener jobs. But this also means that there are transition from these careers towards another kind of careers. The transition from people that are previously employed by, let's say, the gas and oil fields to, let's say, they're employed by solar industries. And so my question is, as youth, how can we deal with this impact of changing and transition jobs? I heard that the UN has an initiative to help countries, government, industries, companies, and especially workers and youth workers to be ready towards this transition, that they can understand that the world are transitioning towards a greener economy, so they have also need to transition towards greener jobs. How does the UN helps, let's say, these stakeholders in achieving these goals?
Thank you, Aga. I think it's a very important question that you raise, because it touches on the issue of education we just discussed, because you need to form the children of today to the job of tomorrow. And as I said, this is what we haven't done in the previous system, because we are still educating the children of today with the system of more than a century ago. So that's already one aspect. But it links as well to the other aspect that I also discussed earlier on, is that we are in a situation today in the world where the Secretary General of the United Nations calls it really an emergency. It's an emergency. You know, there will be a disaster in the making we all see coming. Remember, we were saying we are going straight towards the wall and we still have our foot on the accelerator pedal. So we see that we are heading towards the wall and we are still pressing on the gas, you know, and the gas in all meaning. So I must say that links as well, because if we talk about job, what is a job first? A job is the means through which a person has an income to sustain himself, herself, her family, but it's also a means through which you are going to express yourself. So a job cannot be considered only as something that I do, you know, just to get money. I should do it as well because it corresponds to me, because I have the skills for that, because I've been trained for that. But what is a job? It's also one little speck in the middle of so many other million jobs. So the logic that what I do should not impact wrongly the environment is important at the level of my job, at the level of my company, at the level of my country, and then we think like this. So I must say, this is really what a greener approach has, is that we have to have before we talk about job, we have to have a development that has been conceived in a more sustainable manner. And the very logic of having green job, it's also what we mean, it's actually what we mean is to have an economic activity that does not destroy the planet, that does not destroy people. You see, if there is life on Mars or anywhere else, and if they look at us and listen to us, even today they will say, these creatures on Earth, they are very weird. Because it's only today that they are thinking that they should have an economic activity that does not destroy the planet. How dumb are they? Because actually, it seems so logical, don't you think? It seems, but so blatantly logical that really you wonder, but how come we don't know that? How come we haven't acted before? Since I'm from previous generations, from yours, I can tell you that there was a time in the 80s when I entered the workforce and so on and so forth, where this reflection was not there. And that's where, as I said, the issue of education. It was not something people were sensitized on. But the worst thing happened as well, is that they were nevertheless, as always, activists. People already were saying, hey, we're wrong. You know, already 20 years ago, we started to think of that. Already 40 years ago, even before, actually, the COP27. So it means 27 years we have been discussing about the climate. And those people led to some studies to be done, some research. But these were not publicized. These were not given. So we continued knowing perfectly that something was wrong, but making sure that we don't inform the public. And what happened today? Why you young people are so committed? It's because of the work of those activists 40, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, who alerted the world and say, look, this is happening. So a green job, it's actually a job from a company, an entity, whatever that is, small or big, made by people that have integrated all of us, including the very person who has the job, that I am not going to accept a job where my contribution is to the destruction of the planet. But the notion of job, a green job, it's also the notion of decent job. Because in addition to not affecting the planet, you have to have job where people have a decent salary, so that when you work your butt off, if you allow me the expression, you know, all day long, all months long, all year long, you have to have a decent salary. You have to have a social protection. You have to be protected and not used as a slave. The notion of decent job is also enormously important. But this being said, what is interesting is that you are interested in that. So first, can I ask you, how did you get interested in this notion? Is it through those activists or whatever? How did you come to realize that this was really an important issue that we need to focus on? And because you're so young, do you see already some changes? Or do you think that over the years of your young life, no, you didn't see any change? How do you see that?
I think this question comes a lot from my observation of my surroundings. A lot of my colleagues and friends now, they don't just focus on salaries, and when choosing jobs, they also looks at who is giving them the job, which company they're working for. Because for them, let's say, yes, it's also about the environment, but it's also about what you mentioned, decent salary, work-life balance. And I think it's quite interesting that we're currently in Bali, because a lot of the notion of work-life balance is it's that people need healing or time off from work. And then when people need healing, they go to Bali. So I think now there's a huge transformation, at least among people my age, that it's not just that you live to work, but also that work needs to be decent work. Work needs to be accompanied by decent life. That's it. That's why. And I think next.
How did you become interested in that? Is there somebody who has impacted you?
Yes.
Something you read, something you heard?
I think like the one who impacted me the most, because I never really thought about that in that way, is my brother. My brother just last week, he mentioned to me that he just finished his college, yeah, and he asked me, Aga, what do I do now? If I go to this sector, he's scared that he might be laid off if in the next economic crisis or something happens. But if he chooses this sector, this might be sectors that not very green, but does pay a lot.
Another element that is important, UNICEF, that has been very active, and UNESCO in the Transforming Education Summit actually mentioned that, and I don't remember the exact figure, but the proportions are correct. 60% at least, if it's not 65 or 70, but in that proportion, let's say 60% or 70% of the children who are born today are going to do jobs that do not exist today. It's because our world is changing so fast. So your brother is right to ask, because, the world is going so fast that maybe the work that he's going to do, even in 2 years can have changed. We have the new technology. We have so many things. So that's an important element.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I mentioned to him, like, just find experience. Because you're better off doing something that might be not be there in 10 years rather than doing 10 years of nothing. But I do believe that even if job changes, it's going to be changed alongside the worker. The worker is going to be the one who change the jobs. It's not that jobs exist out of nowhere, but it's because of the workers that these job changes, that these jobs transform. I think one biggest change is in how people used to go to theater, and the job of acting comes not from out of nowhere, but comes out of the stage theater. And after the advent of TV and recording, they move towards acting in TV, which is very different, completely different than acting in the stage. So yeah, job has transformed before, it is transforming now, and it will continue to transform for the future. Thank you.
Well, next we have Rani with her question.
Okay, so it is quite interesting that previously Giras and Aga and of course Madam Valerie has mentioned several points on how youth can participate in education and then obviously in workforce as well. And what's interesting is that Madam Valerie mentioned about how we have the tendency to not letting youth have a say on our future. The children listens and the adults decide, and I think so many youth watching this will agree with me on how the system works that way. and they face that problem, daily. When in fact they have so high spirit in wanting to participate in having a say in their future. So it's quite interesting to highlight that because in fact 2 out of 3 countries, I've researched about this, 2 out of 3 countries in the world actually do not let the youth have a say in their public policy making, which is quite surprising, knowing that the future and the world that lives on will be lived by the youth that live today. And so I think I want to ask more on this because the works that UN does highlights so much on how youth should be participating in, the development of the society and the sustainable goals. But how does UN actually work and achieve and highlight and increase the participation and voice of youth in the policy making? Because we've seen and we've found so many opportunities for youth to be heard, for their voices to be heard, but I don't really see that much opportunities for youth to be involved in the policy making process, which is more important in my opinion. And Giras also mentioned about the common agenda, and in the common agenda, I think we read a chapter about UN initiative on creating a UN Youth Envoy Office, which is quite interesting to me because that shows the dedication of UN to involve youth in their policy making. So I want to dive more on this. How does the UN Youth Envoy or the UN Youth Office works in the worldwide aspect, but also does this UN Youth Envoy Office exist in Indonesia, and how does UN in Indonesia work to increase the participation of youth in Indonesia to be involved in the policy making process?
So we need another 3 hours to discuss all that. But thank you very much for this question. There are many things I would like to mention. So first of all, when it comes to the UN has been at the forefront of pushing for the participation of youth. Actually, already almost 10 years ago in 2013, this is when we had the first UN Special Envoy for Youth. And that showed that already, 10 years ago, the UN really wanted to kind of walk the talk, because the inclusion of youth is not something that has started to discuss now. But there is a nice rhetoric that has been used by many people, but never concretized. So somewhat the UN wanted, because seeing that actually we could not really manage to have the youth's voice, in the discussion, participate in policy making, then this is how the idea of having an envoy came. So that we would have somebody who will represent, so that we are sure. And this is how we had a number of youth who came and participate in the General Assembly. We also have all these model UN that have been also introduced, so that we can have students in university or young students as well, even in the secondary, mimicking what we do at the UN, so that they understand that those discussions impact their life. So the UN has really been at the forefront. So now with the decision of having a youth office is very important. This being said, the youth agenda has been considered since the very beginning, because there is an agency that is called UNFPA, which is the Population Fund, that has 3 main mandates, and one of them is youth. But once again, despite all the efforts that have been done, we saw that youth all over the world were not participating enough. So that's the very logic of having that. And we hope that when we say the youth should participate in policy making, then we have to start with us, because the UN is a normative organization. One of the mandates of the UN, first and foremost, is to set norms and standards through our conventions, our treaties, and so on and so forth. And who contributes to that? Well, the member states of the UN. And who represents the states? They are not necessarily young. So this is when we said, okay, if the UN is the place where policies are discussed, and they are actually super important policies, because they are the policies that are setting the standard for the world. So we have to have an involvement of youth. So I would say we really push for that. But unfortunately, the UN is always as good as its member states. Because if the member states don't translate what is decided, agreed upon in UN meetings at the level of the country, well, we have little, let's say, strength to enforce the strength of the UN is the strength of a thinking that goes beyond, but we need to make sure that the youth are participating in that. Now, what we have to remember, I can see that we have little time, is that when we talk about the participation of youth, I think what is important is also to make sure that we have all youth participating. Because at the same time, we cannot reproduce with the youth what we have among the rest of the world and the population, that is to say, discrimination. We have to have young women, young LGBT population, young indigenous, young coastal and rural community. Because the involvement of the youth means all the youth. And finally, I will finish by saying, in my view, now that I went through youth and a different period after that, what is the privilege of youth? Youth dreams. Because when you are young, you dream. Because you dream of so many things. And those dreams is what should be nurtured, cultivated. Because in our dreams, otherwise it becomes a nightmare, but in our dreams, things are better. Things are nicer. And actually, when you dream, when you have a nice dream, it's never a dream where you destroy the planet. Okay? So I would say we need to nurture that. And if I have one advice to you, youth, is continue to dream, but also live up to your dream. Because don't forget also another thing, is that youth is the future old generation. So you want to be a better older generation than the current generation. I see that we have no more time, so. But now, before I actually pass by the mic to another colleagues, actually what is interesting in what you have mentioned is, I think, this point about the marginalized youth. So in the context of Indonesia, how do you think we can really make sure that the youth of all horizons and profile can join that discussion? How do you do it in the UN association? And what do you plan to do more in order to make sure that youth of all profile, all background can participate?
As an Undersecretary General for Communication and Outreach, that's literally her job description. So please do.
Okay, thank you, Madam Father, for the question, which is very interesting because it allows me the opportunity to explain what we do and then what we hope to do with UN in the future. But I think, it is very important to involve as many as youth as we can without seeing their backgrounds and without discriminating them. And that's what we've been doing both with UN and also in the United Nations Association in Indonesia as well. I think, in my opinion, the best way for now is to collaborate with a bottom-up approach with as many as possible local and youth-led organizations in so many areas across Indonesia. And that's what we've been doing with the United Nations Association. We have so many partners all around the countries, especially with youth organizations which come from so many backgrounds, collaborating with us to do projects and events together. And by doing that partnership, that allows us to actually identify problems and issues that each youth of each area faces. Because in my opinion, because Indonesia is very broad, youth in one specific area has different challenges and problems that compared to youth in another area. For example, youth in Jakarta have different difficulties and situations with youth in Bali or youth in Papua, for example. And collaborating with these localized groups, especially youth-led groups, allow us to hear and listen to what their needs are, what they want to express to UN, for example, what are their dreams, because you've mentioned about dreams. And I know across the country there are so many young individuals who have such a high dreams of participating more for the country and for the future. And I think I can recommend for us and also for UN to collaborate more with youth-led local organizations and groups that will become the bridge for us to reach more youth in the area of Indonesia. But I think that's all from my end. I think for now I will continue to Farah.
We will continue to the second idea. So we've already have a deliberated discussion on solidarity with younger generation, on education, on jobs, and on active voice and participation. Now we will move on to Farah and Mutia, who will discuss the people who haven't even exist yet.
Well, yeah, thank you, Giras, for the transition. And yeah, I mean, I've heard all the conversations just now, and as someone who studied environmental sustainability, I could identify some of, well, all of these problems actually in my syllabus. It is very familiar and very wicked. Very, it's just like in a web that is very impossible to detangle. I'm not saying okay. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really hard as of the moment. And yeah, well, all these problems are so some of these problems are long terms, and a lot of them transcend through like generations. And yeah, we have, as Gira said, like we have talked about the younger generations, and now I want to talk about the future generations who have not even been born. Um, and yeah, because shaping the future of our world, I feel like it requires like the younger generations as well as the future generations, right? Miss Valerie, you also mentioned that as well. Now, I want to highlight the concept of intergenerational thinking. Actually, I read that in the common agenda. And okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is actually like a principle that recognizes responsibilities towards future generations, right? And yeah, after all, decisions that we make now will alter like what will happen in the future. As you said, like the education from like 75 years ago impact like our generations now, and yeah, of course, like it's already been manifested. And yeah, the need for intergenerational thinking increases day by day, and I believe the UN has also acknowledged this. So my question finally, now I wanna, okay, so when reading that and when reading the common agenda, I actually read about the futures lab. It's the implementation, sorry, the manifestation of the UN's promise to implement more long-term intergenerational thinking in its work. Um, and yeah, I just we were conversing, Giras and I, about what this program is, and we actually have not yet understood, which is why I want to impose this question. Like, could you perhaps elaborate more on what Futures Lab is, and the idea behind it, and how it will benefit our country, Indonesia, specifically?
Thank you very much for this question, Farah. The same, the issue of the lab is not new, but within our common agenda, it has been brought to the forefront. Already several years ago, the UN came to the realization, actually in 2008, when there has been the financial crisis. The UN thought, how come we missed out on that? Because at the same time, once again, the UN is not me, it's not the staff of the UN, it's the 193 member states of the UN. How come they have been discussing and meeting and they didn't see it coming, the financial crisis? You know, and this is at that moment that actually the Secretary General then decided to launch a small project within the UN that is called Global Pulse, that actually goes with the idea that already in 2008, we were already in a world of, modern technology, So there was all this discussion on big data and all what you can do with big data and so on and so forth. So the idea with Global Pulse was to have an approach where we would use all this other sphere of information through data that we had not tapped in and that could help us anticipate, foresee what could happen in the world. Since then, Global Pulse has existed. And here in Indonesia, we have what we call Pulse Lab Jakarta, which is one of the, let's say, country expression of Global Pulse. Okay, and we, with Pulse Lab Jakarta, we have been working on this issue of data. Because what do we mean with the Futures Lab? We mean to make sure that we do the proper analysis. And I'm going back to what I said earlier on. We have been analyzing in the UN. The member states have been analyzing because actually, once again, we, the UN, these are the member states. But something obviously once again was wrong. So we have discussed the fact that maybe not the right education, maybe not a number of things, but also, are we using all what we have as data in order to understand? And since today's world is a very highly technical world with a lot of technology, the idea is really to use all this technology to the benefit of having a prospective, a foresight analysis, to be able to project. Because I think the main achievement that the UN should have, we don't have a crystal ball. So we can't look into the crystal ball. And if there was one, I would like to know where to buy it. But if we tap in the good intelligence of everybody, plus in all the tools that we have at our disposal, plus all the data we have at our disposal, and the youth who dream, that's how this whole thing go together. Then maybe we can have a foresight on what's going to happen tomorrow. We can anticipate better. So the idea with this Futures Lab, it's actually to have a group of people and entity and space where systematically we will take into consideration all those elements in order to have this strategic foresight, because we need to anticipate. You see, we took that into consideration in a very concrete area, that is disasters. You see, it already many decades ago, the UN said we have to have a system of early warning whereby we can anticipate that disasters are coming, So the early warning was that we warn the people long enough so that they can move out of the way if the volcano is going to erupt or the river is going to get out of its bed. But then it became more and more, with the use of technology, can we predict the next eruption of the month in Indonesia? Well, there are many months actually, but Merapi or another one? Can we anticipate and so on? So it's the same logic, but applied not only to disasters, but applied to our world. And this is where the youth is actually important. Because be it as it may, I'm a very connected person, not from a technology viewpoint, but because of my job. I have my 2 feet, my 2 hands, and my head constantly in the reality of our world. Yet, because I'm not your age, I don't see things like you. And as much as I try to see things like you, I will never understand really how you see things. Simply because some years separate us. You see? Because I was not formatted the same way you have been. I was not born in the same environment. You see? So the Futures Lab, it's really a realization that we need to have also not only analyzing what's happening today, of course, taking the lessons from the history, because that is important. And that link to, you mentioned the intergenerational discussion. Also, we have to be very careful that in this day and age now, where we say, no, youth have to participate, youth have a word to have to have a word in the decision, we should not fall to the other extreme, that we only listen to the youth and forget the lessons of the past. Because one thing that I know better than you is the lessons of the past, But you know better how the world is today, and you have a better understanding on where it could go. So if we combine the knowledge of the past, of the current generation, and the next one, then this is where we can have a better foresight, a better perspective. And this is very important, to have a prospective analysis, because also the work of the UN is not only to anticipate, but to prevent bad things to happen and to mitigate what we can't prevent from happening. So I would say the whole logic with the Future Lab, it's really to use all those tools, the big data, the foresight analysis, also the behavioral science. It's another thing that is very important. We have moved, so much in this area. How people react and behave, and why do we wait to have our feet, our knees, our legs, and actually up to here we are now in the disaster with the planet. How come that we have to wait until we are up to here in the disaster of the planet to react? In terms of behavior, that's interesting. But would your generation do the same? Not necessarily, but why? All this has to be analyzed. So that's more or less what the Futures Lab are all about, is to say we need to constantly have a vision towards the future. And actually I can use, there is a French, let's say, thinker analyst and I would say a writer. His name is Jacques Attali. And he was the first one already several years ago who talked about the necessity for government, that each government should have, as among the ministries, one ministry for the future generation. Because there should be a constant vision on what my decision today, how will it impact the future generation? And you know, we should do that in our lives as well. We do that actually. Okay, if I buy this house today, it means that. Or if I study that, it means that. If I have children today, then I'm going for 20 years of responsibilities to bring up those kids and so on. So we always project ourselves towards the future. And I would say, therefore, we do the decision today thinking what's going to happen in 20 years. But we have to do it at the level of our planet constantly, all the time, in our economy, in our finance, in our human resources, in everything. And somewhat we hope that having future labs, that is to say, people who really kind of are the geek of that, putting all together all the technology, not that they have the answer, but they know how to connect all that so that we can anticipate. We as UN, we have to put more energy in anticipating, but we can't do it only with a certain base. That was the base of when we were created 78 years ago. We need to do it with the reality of today, hence plugging in the youth, but making sure also that we get the lessons. We should never forget history. You remember, beyond the lessons of the past of the current generation, there is as well the history. And you know what it said? What is said is that if you forget your history, there is a big chance that it's going to repeat itself. So also you, the youth, where you have a responsibility, is whatever you do in your life, please don't replicate the mistake of the other generation, And then you have to keep that almost as a motto on your screen, in your telephone, so that every day when you wake up, you have the advice, don't do like the past generation. It's very important. But that's it. And then look towards the future constantly. And the last thing that I would like to add on that, it's actually when we talk about, because you mentioned, Farah, the responsibility towards the future generation. We all have that responsibility, because I say, already you are old compared to a 10-year-old. No, I'm sorry, we start to be seriously old, guys. Huh? So on and so forth. But this responsibility is with every one of us at all moments, in all we do. And that's the question on environment. Environment cannot be changed if each of us don't change. But at the same time, there is an extra responsibility for those who are in power, for those who make the big decisions. And this is also where a system of accountability has to be, I would say, developed and increased, because who is responsible for today's mess? Who will pay for that? Pay in the symbolic way and not necessarily with money. So I think comes with also positions of power, come more responsibility and more requirement of accountability. And that's also something that we need to think, also within these future labs, how can we do that? But now, what is interesting, since Farah, you seem to be really interested in that vision towards the future. So we are in 2022. 28 years down the line, in 2050, how do you think the world would look like? More particularly, what about Indonesia? How is it going to look like? And is it, when you think of that, when you project yourself now, 28 years, let's say 3 decades ahead, is it something that you look at with confidence? Or are you afraid? Are you excited? Or are you anxious? How do you live that as a young person today in Indonesia?
Right. 28 years into the future is very long, actually. First of all, Ms. Valerie, thank you for the explanation. Now I understand future's a lot better. But regarding your question, I want to be hopeful, actually. Because, okay, right now, a lot of youths are more aware of the current situation of the world, of the climate change, or like deforestation rate, whatever. So yeah, with the amount of like young people who are working towards like a more sustainable future, I feel like it is although you mentioned something about like us still hitting on the acceleration pedal, right? And I know that at the moment the degrowth rate that we need to achieve is actually like it's not sufficient yet to basically to for us to achieve the desirable future that we were hoping for like a few years ago. But I want to be hopeful still because right now that awareness of like you know sustainable environment, the knowledge for like sustainable environment is increasing among us. And of course still like it still needs to be improved. And I really hope that like 28 years down the line there will be like a more holistic education on sustainable development that basically like also incorporates like all those updated like strategies that can help us as humanity to achieve like something more concrete to like save our world. And hopefully like by then like we can make like more conscious decisions. I mean, for now, like look at bye bye plastic bags in Bali. Like they have achieved they have made Bali into like plastic bag free and plastic utensil free what is it? Is this is a province, right? Sorry. Yeah, like a plastic free province, and that's actually awesome. And I think that if we work together, like we try to achieve like that collective action, you also said that each of us has to change, right? And if that awareness comes from like each individual, I think 28 years down the line we can have a much better world, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
I know it might take a bit of time on what we were going to discuss next, but you said something, you see, that rang for me in a particular manner. And I think I want to use it as a good example, and no offense to you because you are not responsible for that. But you see, for instance, I was telling you, you are the young people, but you're already old compared to others, because we're always compared to others. And you see, you have grown these last 20 years in the world that has created the mess we are in. And although you think that you are all fresh in your mind on what we should do, you already have been contaminated and polluted. And here I'm not talking about the pollution of the air, I'm talking about the contamination and the pollution of the thinking and the reasoning. Because you said something, you said, but we know that today we don't have enough growth in order to achieve the development we want. You see, we have managed to inculcate in a generation this paradigm that has been destroying the world, that everything has to be measured in terms of growth, economic growth, that everything has to be monetized, that this is the criteria of development, that this is what makes life good. And we have done that so much. We have polluted all the thinking. And nowadays, when you have people, those who have another vision, that dare talk about, what about a zero growth society? Why should our society be only measured on the amount of money it does? But you see, it comes from an approach where you had a number of economists who said, the market is all. Economy is everything. Markets should be free. We have to be led by market, not by, less state, more a free market, more free economy. And this has resulted in what we have today. But as I say, no offense to all of you, but you have been contaminated by that. So what it means is that we need to change. We have to have a paradigm shift complete in our mind. So that's why you, the teacher, Jaras, you have to make sure that what you teach the kids today is that money is a mean, but not an end. And that therefore, be happy is not being rich. Being happy, the happiness lies on many other criteria. So therefore, the leaders of the world and the youth of this world have to help define how do we develop a world where we seek a happiness that is based on that, and not money, as we have done over the last 7 or 8 decades.
Thank you very much, Madam Valerie. Lastly, we have Mutia. Last but not least, Mutia, please do.
Thank you, Giras. Okay, so actually, for those who are watching, before we start this session, we actually had a conversation about the books that you were reading, right, madam? And you mentioned one book called Ministry for the Future, right? And this is actually my question, because I read in the our common agenda that UN is actually trying to set up a future-oriented organization entity called the UN Special Envoy for Future Generation. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that is really interesting for me because that means that the the future generation will have like sort of legal standing, so that means they will be able to be represented by the current generation, right? And that also means that we as the youth of current generation will be able to represent them, and the decision makers will also have to like incorporate our voices, our voices that represent the voices of the future generations into their decisions, so that the future generations wouldn't have to like experience the consequences that we current generations makes. And as you said, that there are so many like bad things happening right now in the world. So my question is, how do you see the implementation of the work and practice of the special envoy for the future generation, or maybe as what you read, the ministry for the future? How can you see it being implemented in every country, including Indonesia? And how can we, as the youth of future generation, help ensure that the implementation is going like correctly, and especially in Indonesia? Yeah. And that's
Thank you, Muthia, for this question. I must say, what you said, future generation should have a legal standing. And that is true. And once again, I hope we arrive at this point where in all constitutions of the world, there will be a recognition of that. And if you push, you, the citizens of the world, those who vote, okay, you have power. If we push for that, will happen. Because remember, once again, going back many decades ago, children were not considered as having the same rights. They were not recognized as a person having rights. And it took a number of, once again, people, committed activists to change that. And now everywhere in all the countries, we recognize that children are as a human being, as a grown-up. And therefore, they have exactly the same rights. Then came the issue of women that I mentioned earlier on. For too long, we have said women, and still today, women don't have the same enjoyment of rights. But at least it has been recognized that women should have the same rights. Now we don't have yet the same enjoyment of rights. So I hope that really we achieve, and we can achieve that. We just need to really fight for it, to make sure that future generation becomes a legal definition that has a legal standing, and then the logic of having a ministry for the future generation, like an obligation for all government to never take a decision without going through the filter of how it's going to impact the future generation. But I think in order to achieve that, we need another shift. We need to move from human rights to rights. And it comes from me, who I consider myself as a human rights activist, first and foremost. That's the way I define my work at the UN. And I believe in human rights. And this is fantastic. Luckily, at one stage, we defined that people have rights. But of course, it's with a humanity that is far from perfect. And we know that we are not really perfect. And what happened after we defined the fact that we had rights? We have put it on a scale. And we have decided that human beings, we call ourselves the top of the food chain, and we said we are superior to everything. So while giving ourselves rights, because it's actually a self-declaration, human rights, it's human declaring they have rights. It's a I declare I have rights. This is what happened, but that's good. I'm not saying it's not good. But while doing so, we have taken it, as very often human beings do, with a big, not a pinch, a big dose of arrogance and superiority, and say, yes, I have rights, and I am more important than everything else under that. And then more important than animals, more important than the planet. Everything is at my service, what we discussed initially. So I think we should keep human rights, but move to the idea that animals have rights. The planet has rights. And if we enter into that, and then the future generations have rights. Because we know we are ephemeris. From the moment we die, we are born, we know we're going to die. But we have to work in the logic that is in our common agenda, the common public good. That I am on this planet, there are goods that are for all of us. And for the time I am on this planet, I'm going to work to make it better, not to take it all just for me. But you see, the development model we had in the past was a very individualistic one as well. So in order to change and to go into the logic of rights, you have to embrace fully the very notion of equality and equity and solidarity. And I think that for as long as we don't embrace those concepts and we don't raise them to the level where they should be, is that equity and solidarity are essential. And everything that is on this planet has rights. So we have to talk about the planet's rights, the animals' rights, the same way we talk about human rights, and recognize that all of us, we are important. And I think this is only if we do this shift that we can embrace the logic of future generation. Because otherwise, if we continue to say human beings are more important than everything else, well, sorry, we are wrong. Human beings are important, but not more important. Because actually the big thing, and I was debating that yesterday with a colleague in my office, you see, if tomorrow all the animals, insects disappear from the planet, we will die. Because we need the animals. And all of them, by the way, because they have a system of balance that exists. If all the trees and the ocean is polluted and all the trees disappear tomorrow from the planet, we die. But guess what? If we die, the animals and the planet can live. So we have to come down from the little, I don't know, pedestal where we put ourselves as human beings, thinking that we are so important, and just go down and realize that we are one among others. We are not more important. And as a matter of fact, if we disappear tomorrow, no one will notice. Because the planet can live without us. The animals can live without us. But we can't live without the animals and the planet. So somewhat, this shift, we are not there yet, sadly. But this is the shift that has to happen. And if we take that shift, then we stop thinking in terms of growth and money. Because the value also shift. What is important today, money, billionaires, if we change that thinking, then this is not important anymore. Because we have defined the importance on the basis of rights in an equal and equitable manner. And therefore, we derive from that as well what makes us happy, but us a collective us. How can you make trees happy? How can you make animals happy? Why should it be only our happiness at the expense of all the rest? So really, there are big shifts. So I hope that in the Futures Lab, we're going to discuss that as well. But actually, Muhtia, do you think this is possible? We can arrive at this point of having the future generation having a legal standing? And if I had this power to tell you, Muhtia, you're responsible for that in Indonesia, what would you do? What are the first things you would do in order to achieve this really serious paradigm shift?
That's a very interesting answer. And also the follow-up question is also very interesting for me, because that makes me think, what am I gonna do if I were to give the responsibility to, let's say, be the ministry for the future generation in Indonesia, especially. And I think the first thing first is to try to implement the values that you said, the equality, equity, and the solidarity values. I think that's like those three are really important to be implemented, to be let's say now the UN has the sustainable development goals and then the leaving no one behind, those values we as UNAI are also trying to help share and try to implement in the society, especially within the youth in Indonesia. And if we were to have like this program, probably after this we'll create a program specifically related to the future generation, right? In Unai. So yeah, speaking like currently I have the let's say I have my colleagues in Unai. I'll try to help create a program related to that and try to implement those values, because if we can implement the values, then we can also try to change their mind. Because I think the problem, like we talk about education, we talk about green jobs, we talk about the voice and active participation of the current generation. I think those stuffs, if we didn't have the three values that you mentioned earlier when try to implement the like in education and then the sustainable jobs and etc., we cannot achieve the legal standing that we talked earlier regarding the future generation. Yeah, that's kind of like, I think, I wouldn't say utopist, but I couldn't find the right word of it. Like, it's just me trying to think and see what I can do as a youth in Indonesia and as a colleague in NAI, as me and my team in NAI. So yeah, I think that's it from me. Going back to Giras, thank you very much, madam, for the enlightenment, for the new perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mutia and Madame Valerie Julien. So that sums up our discussion. Here's a couple takeaways that I already had. In relation to solidarity with younger generation, I know, for instance, Transforming Education Summit is for us to transform our education for the future generation. Because right now, even, well, no offense to myself and also to my colleagues here, that we are already ingrained with this idea of economic growth, quantifying everything with economic growth. And as Madame Valerie Julien said, that now I have the burden as an elementary school teacher, literally primary education. I need to be able to transform education by again having that student-centered way of teaching, and I hope to continue to do that in my role as an elementary school teacher. And why do we need to transform education? Also, it will result in a generation that are more environmentally conscious. That in the end will result to also a generation that will have not only green job but a decent green job, because there are some jobs that are not decent. This is a topic of inequality that's for further discuss for tomorrow, basically. And then on the youth active participation with the establishment of the youth office, I highlighted here that the youth office is meant to have youth participation in the UN, because at the end of the day, uh, these youth are gonna be the next future quote unquote older generation of policymaker, and that's why we need to establish that youth office to have that youth participation. On solidarity with future generation, it is already mentioned on the future slab. The future slab is meant as a realization to have a better foresight, basically, a better foresight, a better analysis to prevent bad things, quote unquote, happening to us in the future. And of course, as Madam Valerie said, that it's called future slab, but in uh, doing the research in the labs, we need to have not only the youth perspective who are dreamers. I love to dream, but also the historical perspective of the past events as well. And lastly, on the special envoy on future generation, as Madam Valerie mentioned, my takeaway is that we need to have a thorough understanding first on human rights, of who have rights. Everyone have rights. Not human rights then. Rights. On rights. Exactly. A rights activist, exactly. Well, maybe Madam Valerie, well, you should change your title to a rights activist because you mentioned before you're a human rights activist. As a right activist, that's true because even the idea of human rights, a rights coordinator, RC, that's true, rights coordinator. The idea of rights, we need to have that idea first of rights in order for us to have a logical framework of equality, equity, and solidarity with the future generation. Well, before I wrap up, and the planet and the animal. Yeah. The future and the future generation of everyone not everyone who have rights, everyone, every live, yeah, everyone. One is not only a person. So before we close up, I want to give a last chance for Madame Valerie Julien to perhaps, do you have any closing remark on concluding our discussion today on our common agenda on succeeding generation shaping the future? Do you have any concluding remarks on this discussion?
Well, I have to say, to conclude, is that very often, when we think and we discuss those issues, it can be daunting. We can end up being very, the gloom and doom of the task ahead. Because it's not only the task ahead, as I say, it's the situation we are in today. But there is hope, because until there is no more hope. So, and it's never too late, but we all have, if we haven't yet done this, start today. Because we really change the world today, not in the future. We need to keep an eye on the future for what I decide today, how it will impact the future. But the world is today. So it's today that we should all change the way we work and think and plan and so on and so forth. But there is hope. And my last word would be that if you look at the history of the world and how the world has evolved, every time the world has evolved in a good direction, it was actually thanks not so much to governments, with all due respect to what leaders of the world are doing, but it was thanks to people, civil society, and very often the youth. People change the world, not governments. So you people are in charge of that.
That's a lot of burden. What do you think, Farah? That's a lot of burden to be imposed with that kind of statement. But of course, no. But I think everyone, as well in the United Nations, it's we the people. We the peoples mean that we are the one who have the power to change our future. That's true in our preamble of the United Nations. But that's a wrap for our first UNRC and UNAI dialogue. I will try to change the name to something more interesting, because it feels very formal. Probably next time we will have like some tea time, like drinking tea. I don't know. We'll keep you updated on this. It sounds very formal because now, in reality, this is actually just a fun discussion, a fun talk for us to spend an hour together to talk about current events. So thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank Madame Valérie Julien for coming here today to discuss an important issue. And then also my colleague from the senior management of the UNAI Secretariat and everyone's in the backstage who has been supporting us as well. And thank you for everyone watching live from YouTube. And this is a wrap. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and goodbye.